there's another one, guys. It's another video about things we can ask councils to try and get improvements based on the questions that a network of us asked in the last housing committee in Bedford. But the point is, it's not just Bedford. You can do this in your local council. That's why we're doing a video about it. So the next question that was asked is all about supported housing. And supported housing, I know, Shannon, it's something that you're pretty hot on at the moment. You've got the supported housing bill going through, which has some very interesting aspects to it. And for the last 18 months at least, it has been in the news that you've got these kind of cowboy supported accommodation providers who have basically realised you can make a huge amount of money out of this if you have a shithole HMO and you say it's supported accommodation and you go and see someone every so often to go and get some rent from them. So that's kind of, as I say, been a national issue. We've heard stories from around the country of people just outrageous things happening in these projects. And the thing to understand is that those supported accommodations, they get this kind of enhanced housing benefit rate. So it's not just like a normal HMO. They get hundreds of pounds more than a normal HMO would do. And they don't need to be registered. So there's a few other things that are probably worth saying just to set the scene. For a registered provider of supported housing, if that's the right term, there are some other terms rumbling around, but I think you know what I mean. So for those supported accommodation providers, the housing benefit they claim for their people living there is essentially comes from central government. That's kind of how it works. It goes through the local authority, but it comes from central government. But for those unregistered providers, a certain amount will come from central government, but the local authority have to top up to the order of hundreds of pounds for each person, that amount of money. So in one sense, those unregistered providers are a drain on the local authority's finances. And all they're really doing a lot of the time, people we know, Shannon, is they kind of make people worse. That's, people go in with no support issues and they come out with 5 because it's just a horrible place to live and it grinds you down. So yeah, that's the context for this question. Essentially the question is, what can the council do? What more could the council do to kind of improve things, basically? Have I missed anything from the kind of the essence of the question, Shannon?
So I think the question was also about whether the council had contributed to the supported housing bill that's going through currently, and would they be interested in that? And I think the answer was pretty much we would welcome standards of supported accommodation. So I think they'll be keeping an eye on it afterwards, but I didn't necessarily get the feel that they were hugely invested in the sort of before or up to now process.
Yeah, it's another one where the council's got this really weird relationship with like supported housing, because again, when I work, going back 10 years now, worked for the council, the people in charge of those kind of things where they're kind of say, well, that organisation's cheap, just pay them, and they knew they were getting a very poor service for their money, but they didn't cost much. So it's like that was kind of the mentality. And equally, even these unregistered providers, which cost the council a lot of money, and I don't believe that none of the council officers don't have concerns about some of these providers in Bedford. But they also use them because, again, like rogue landlords, you've got someone who needs to get housed. Well, there's a bed space in that place. It's really easy to get someone in. Easy, job done, positive stat. Quite apart from the fact that person often comes back round again in a few months' time because they've been evicted, which is an interesting one with the supported housing bill, because as you're saying, Shannon, essentially if someone gets evicted but they won't get, the quality of support wasn't great and the quality of the accommodation wasn't good enough, then they can't be intentionally homeless, which is going to be fascinating to see how that rolls out. So that's kind of, again, it's interesting. So the kind of the official response from the council was that, first of all, was to point out many supported housing providers do excellent work, which is not my opinion, but fair play to them. That's what they've said.
I think what was confusing for me was part of the sort of answer was that the local authority weren't aware of any significant issues within sort of the local supported accommodation, but then it was mentioned that they applied for funding through the supported housing improvement scheme. Now, they were rejected for that funding, and they've taken that to mean that it's because it's not as bad as in other areas. But it kind of leads me to wonder why you would apply, because applying for funding is big work. Why would you apply for funding to improve the supported housing if you weren't aware of any issues?
It's already excellent. Yeah.
If it's already top notch, and the stuff that's being done is excellent, then you wouldn't need any extra funding. It's almost selfish to apply for that funding if you don't need it, and particularly being aware of other issues around the country. So I would be interested to sort of know, I guess, what classes as significant issues, because when you're living in supported accommodation, issues that might seem small to other people feel massive to you, and I think that's not to be downplayed. And I think crucially as well, it sort of, again, I think this is where co-production can really come into its element, is there's a whole cohort of people within the borough who either have experience of the supported accommodation providers within Bedford, exempt or not exempt, but also are currently in there. And I think that's such a wealth of knowledge. Again, it's just another missed opportunity, because I think in one sense, people are scared of getting negative feedback. But although I have some very negative things to say about some supported housing providers within the area, I also have reams of positive things to say. And I think that there needs to be a balance where you do involve people with lived experience of these issues.
I think there's like a danger, and I don't think this is intended to be the answer at all here, is that you essentially kind of just silence a lot of people, because essentially what you get in an area is you get the main charities, they're singing about how great they are. You got the council saying, yeah, they do excellent work, but you've got a few hundred people in the area, I'd have thought at least, who have had a very bad experience, and it's kind of like they've been silenced, as if they're experience, you kind of you make a complaint or something, oh, you're just being negative. And it's almost like we're living in a world in a time now where there's so many of our societal problems. You get like today, the inquiry into English and Welsh cricket. Yeah, it's institutionally racist. That's something that a lot of people have been saying for years and just got kind of beaten down and silenced. And ultimately, it turns out, there's another issue that's kind of everyone knew about at the time and didn't do enough. And I think supported housing, there's a danger that by kind of, I understand why they're doing it, but by kind of just giving that positive spin all the time of supported accommodation, you are by definition, you're effectively gaslighting a bunch of people who have got genuine complaints and kind of saying like their opinions are biased or whatever. Everyone's biased, and you kind of as I say, you end up kind of silencing, as you say, a really large section of the population. And again, they don't kind of take necessarily kind of just say, okay, fair enough, I'm wrong, you're right. They know that they're right, and they go away and they kind of they have less vested interest in society, and it has a knock-on effect to how they then contribute to society and how they feel about it, whether it's a just place and a fair place to live in. So I think it has all those that danger that just by talking about the positive stuff and wanting to kind of maintain and protect this positive image of stuff, it can have an inadvertent kind of quite a serious negative impact. Because I mean, how many people do we know between us, Shannon, who had a very bad experience of it all? Whether it was directly as a result of workers there or because of other people living there, the quality of it all, just the fact that some hostels, there is no way out. You just kind of, you don't even know how many years you're going to have to live there before you get out. That they are life-changing things that happen. And they're not just being negative and nitpicking when they say, actually, there's some serious problems here. So yeah,
it is dismissive, and I think it potentially comes from that sector-wide attitude of these homeless people, they need support. They can't possibly survive in a home where you're allowed visitors past 10 p.m. They can't possibly survive in a home where you're allowed a beer with your curry on a Saturday night. They can't possibly survive in a home where you're allowed to open your own post, or you're allowed whatever some of the silly sort of regulations that we're putting on grown adults here, and calling it support. I'm not saying that there aren't some people out there who need support, want support, like that, what have you. I think when we hold an attitude of these people, because they've experienced homelessness, can't do anything else, we're completely ignoring the fact that there were a whole other person before their stint of homelessness. For some people, it might only be a month of homelessness. That's all you're seen as. And I think I've certainly been in places where I've been told I'm lucky to be there. And I think, again, this comes back to a conversation we were having earlier where, you know, it's not lucky to be housed. It's not lucky to be given a roof over your head. And it's not lucky to not be listened to and actually to be treated less than what you are. I think it's not a choice-based system, supported accommodation. For so many people, it's not a choice-based system. For so many people, you're told this is your option, or sleep rough. And I don't see how that's a good choice out there. And I think, yeah.
I mean, I've never lived in a hostel, but I worked in supported accommodation for a long time, and I wince at pretty much everything I did now. So I worked in supported accommodation for 6 years, first 6 years of my kind of time in the homeless sector, and I look back and I just regret it. All of those, I've enforced those stupid rules like barring people because they had a mobile phone and shit like that. It's just, you just see the damage you did. I still see people around Bedford who are like, yeah, I remember you when you were 16 and you stayed in the night shelter, and I really wish we'd have known what we were doing to actually get you out of there as quick as, so you didn't have to stay there at all. It just erodes people down the whole system, and it does absolutely trap people. So it absolutely is a revolving door, which I guess is why we're all about homeless applications and get people out of it. So yeah.
And it goes back to the point that you often quote. Is it Lem Sisse? Probably pronouncing that all wrong.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Where they say, the most institutionalized people are the workers, and yet that's not who we're treating as institutionalized. We're treating the clients like that. Whereas actually, if people aren't being told that they can do better or don't, for whatever reason, aren't doing better, then we have this system.
Yeah. So this question, I guess, is, again, it's just kind of, if nothing else, it has just kind of made the housing committee aware that there is a supported housing act coming in, and that it's gonna potentially have an impact on the local supported accommodation. And again, I know councillors who would who would know the same sort of things we do about the hostel system. I think a couple who've worked in the sector, and they would share some reviews to what we have. So yeah, it's just good to throw that stuff out there, really. I mean, with this one, it's almost going to be a case of when the supported housing act comes out, we've prepared the ground for that. Okay, oh yeah, this is what they're talking about before. I've now looked into it, so we can kind of, again, probably just with this one, just kind of ask questions around things that we know are going to come in with the act, in order, so for example, around that one, around people are unintentionally homeless if they get evicted from inadequate supported accommodation. That's going to be a problem for housing options, because it's going to be churning out people who are probably in priority need and are not intentionally homeless. That's it's great for from the work we do. We're happy about it, but the council might not be, so they need to kind of learn what's going to be coming in. All right, we done? Let's go to the next one.
Is it worth mentioning? I didn't know if it was worth mentioning that we have made sort of an FOI off the back of this question as well.
Yeah.
Because it was sort of highlighted that the financial cost wasn't very high with supported accommodation, but sometimes there's a financial impact with the exempt accommodation. So we have done an FOI sort of around that. So hopefully we'll get some good information about how much it is actually costing and which providers, because this is another really weird thing that isn't, put out there. But we don't necessarily know which providers are exempt and which ones aren't, which are regulated and which aren't. Like, how is that not public knowledge?
I'm pretty sure some of them have, like, some of the bed spaces are registered and some of them aren't. Well, certainly that's how it has been. So yeah, so it's and then, okay, that's a good point. So because we had when we did the work on the housing allocation scheme a few years back, one of the things we raised, and one of the things the council, like, I think they went with us. There was the fact that we knew people who'd basically, gone to a particular supported accommodation provider who had both registered and unregistered beds. And the difference being, the important thing is the people in registered beds, that's not the right term, but you know what I mean? They would get onto the housing register and out of the housing register quicker than people who were in the unregistered bed. So you had somebody who went to a project, they were told, oh, do you want to move here? It's better. So they said, well, yeah, okay, it was better. And what they weren't told was actually that means they've just fallen out of the housing allocation policy kind of priority. So it does, this again, it does make a difference. And you're absolutely right. The fact that people living in a particular provider's accommodation doesn't know what it is, doesn't know what kind of category it is, doesn't know what implications are. That's a problem for them in terms of being able to take kind of ownership over what they then do.